Anti-war protests have swept Columbia University's campus for 7 days straight now. Heavy police presence, threats of suspension, and even verbal lashings from some members of Congress have done little to dissolve the demonstration.
New York Post reporter and part-time student at Columbia, Rikki Schlott, has been on the ground at Columbia following developments in the protest, and she is joining us right now. Rikki Schlott, thank you for joining Rising.
Thanks for having me.
So what have you seen while you are there? How would you characterize the protests that are taking place?
So I first was on campus on Thursday when the NYPD actually came in and cleared out the first iteration of the encampment, and I've been there ever since. And for the entirety of this past week now with this encampment, it's been closed. So you can only go on campus if you have an ID, which was super fortuitous for me as a part-time reporter, or full-time reporter and part-time student. And so everyone on campus is a student. They seem to have some reports that there are some outside people who have come in, but by and large, I would say the students inside are nonviolent and peaceful, and have been camping out and decided to resign to arrest last week. Whereas I'd say outside the campus gates is where I've seen some more boisterous protests. And for example, the clip that went viral of someone saying that we are Hamas. And I think presumably the vast majority of the people outside the gates are not Columbia students.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the students have been reacting to the increased police presence?
So we've had police presence throughout the semester, just pretty much every time a protest flared up. I would say that by and large, people have been pretty hostile to the police presence on campus. I've heard a lot of students on campus screaming NYPD, KKK. And I mean, there are so many of them. It's hard to even imagine. Sometimes when I get there in the morning and I come out of the subway and there's no protesters, it's just a sea of blue. But the campus at this point, since it last cleared the encampment on Thursday, which the president actually greenlit, has not allowed NYPD back physically on campus. So we just have increased security. They sent out an email saying that they were checking people's photo IDs as they walked in on campus, that they had an escort for anyone who had chosen to or feels uncomfortable on campus. But my experience has been that I have gone on and off campus a gazillion times just scanning my ID without someone looking at the photo. But they claim to have increased security measures that are sponsored by the school itself and not the NYPD.
How do you and other students feel about classes going virtual for the rest of the semester, the kind of disruption to the basic educational mission of the university?
Yeah, so I definitely want to clear up what I've seen is a lot of misreporting on this. Classes are not fully remote right now. They're hybrid, and it's an option for anyone who doesn't feel like they're comfortable going to campus. But for students who do want to participate in person, that is still an option to the school's credit. My experience personally was I went to my last class yesterday, which was Wednesday night, and I would guess 12 out of the 15 of the students in my class did actually show up to campus. And the 3 that did not were all 3 Jewish students who decided to Zoom in. And I know among people who don't feel comfortable on campus right now with the encampment that they are frustrated that they're back on Zoom school. It feels much like the pandemic. But I do want to clarify that the school does have an option for those who do want to go in person still to go in person.
Do you have any additional insight into the new reporting that former Proud Boy member Gavin McKinnon was on campus today, and also maybe speak to the response of students to the presence of a number of House members who came to speak critically of the protest this week?
Yeah, so I've heard from sources that Gavin McKinnon was on campus yesterday. He was seen walking around in the vicinity of where Speaker Johnson was. And I was at the presser next to Speaker Johnson at that point in time when he did come out and speak on the steps overlooking the encampment. And I would say the response to his presence was overwhelmingly negative, and there were very few supporters in the audience. In fact, he was heckled and booed to the point where I don't think anybody who was not standing directly next to him, like I was even able to hear him say anything. And I mean, that certainly belies a misunderstanding of free speech and free expression. That's not a free exchange of ideas. And as much as I am fully for peaceful protests, I do understand that the encampment as well, does violate longstanding viewpoint neutral encampment and tenting policies on campus, and that there's some time, place, and manner aspects as well.
And are those encampments have come down or are coming down, is our understanding?
So as of yesterday, the encampment was still up there when I was on campus. There were negotiations. Originally, there was a midnight Tuesday deadline where the school said, if you're not out, we're going to clear you out. And one thing that's worth clarifying is when the NYPD did come in, they said over a loudspeaker, everyone who leaves and gathers their things will not be arrested, or something to that effect. And the people that did choose to stay effectively decided that they would prefer to be arrested than to clear up and pack up. But at the moment, they did agree to take down a number of tents in the center of the encampment, which I think had something to do with like a fire concern. And they also, student organizers agreed to make sure that anyone who was not affiliated with the university would leave the encampment. So I think, there are cops everywhere and there are security personnel at all points in the entry of campus, but like you could easily just pass your ID through a gate somewhere to somebody who's an outsider and presumably they could get in.
Rikki, you're in such a unique position as both a student and a journalist. Before we wrap, can you just let us know if there's anything else that you feel like has been poorly reported or poorly understood by the mainstream press as they're trying to get a handle of what's going on campus?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is I think there's been a conflation of the students inside and the people outside at Columbia, and a lot of clips that have been understandably run, especially when media can't get access to campus except for between 2 and 4 p.m. They're going to air clips of people outside. And I've seen people who were students at other universities, professors at other universities, and just people from the local community. I would say my experience of the students on campus as a person who appears to be a student myself as well, just filming and walking around and trying to be polite, but also trying to document it is students are kind, or they're not impolite. I think that they're very cautious about their behavior, and they're aware of the fact that it could come back to bite them. And they're wrapping themselves in masks and Palestinian scarves to obscure their identity as much as possible. And they're also, one thing that was super interesting to me is, as I've been recording from a respectful distance and not harassing anyone ever, I've been asked and told time and again that you're not allowed to record, which is not true in a common space in a quad in a college. But I think that's certainly one thing is the Columbia students seem especially concerned about concealing their identities and not being exposed.
Yeah, when I've covered protests on college campuses in the past, I too have, while recording people, encountered protesters who I understand them not wanting to be recorded, but if they're in a public place, they can be recorded, and they can take efforts, obviously, to disguise themselves and have in other circumstances, and now have the additional COVID rationale for doing so. Rikki, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated it.
Thank you.